You are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of.
But you have heard of me.
Okay, so today we're going to dig more into the investigative side of forensics to kind of figure out, we're going to act like there's a server compromise. Okay, now we're going to pretend that the server that I'm logged into, I am actually, let's say that this is a web server, but for some reason we've noticed a dramatic increase in the amount of memory used, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type in free-h. That lets us know, hey, look, this guy isn't supposed to be using this much memory, right? So let's see who's using all the memory. And to do that, we're going to do psaux, and then we're going to say sort, and we're going to say by percentage of memory used, and we're going to grab the first 10 lines with head. So here we see we have some processes that are running under the ptarent user, okay, and these three in particular make me wonder what's going on. Now I know these are Minecraft servers, so let's pretend they're not. Let's say there's some other program that's using a ton of memory, and in this case, Python main.py doesn't really help us because we don't know where the main py came from, right? We don't know anything about where this is at, right? And most people don't know how to find that. And also we have these Java processes here. So these are my first concern. This is my second concern. Okay, we're already going to have some questions we want to answer, right? And some of these questions are they're easy to think about, but at the same time, and a lot of them are easy to answer if you know how, right? So we know we have this strange user process here. We know it came from that user ptarent. So let's first go ahead and see who's currently on the system. Do we have someone in the system right now, and we just simply type in W for this, that might be our culprit? Well, we have a root who is on our TTY as opposed to a PTS, which is different. This is a terminal session through SSH. This is actually logged into the machine. This one's been idle for 27 days and it's sitting on bash. So someone logged in as root and walked away. That person needs to be fired. Just saying. And now we see ptarent here, who we know is me, and we see that the IP address, this is my machine, and we see that we've been logged in at a certain time. We haven't been idle because we just ran a command, and we can look and see that I'm SSH'd in and that I'm privileged user. Okay, so I'm currently logged in as root. So, well, I'm logged as myself and I've elevated to root. But anyway, so that's how you find some quick information about who's here, right? Let's look at the last couple logins and see what's been going on. So to do that, you're going to type in last, okay, and that's going to show you a listing of all the people who've last logged into your server in a time format. So we can see here that this person's still logged in, but wait a minute, where'd this guy come from? And we're going to pretend that's a different IP address. So we see here that this dude logged in as me at a time when I don't remember logging in, because I'm currently still logged in. He was logged in for 14 minutes. What did they do during those 14 minutes? Or let's say, for instance, Saturday, I was playing golf or something stupid, which I don't do. But let's pretend that I was, and we can see that this guy was in for 18 hours. What was he doing for 18 hours, right? Could it be that maybe he logged in and forgot to turn off his server and then went to bed? I mean, it's possible. And also look at this. This is an indication that, all of a sudden we've gone from 2 to 5. So we have different, these are still logged in when this one turned on, right? So these are things to worry about. And then let's also look and see who else may have logged in by username. So we're just going to say last log. Okay, and this is going to show us all the usernames that logged into our machine. And most of these you're going to see never logged in because they are, they're, the word's escaping me. They're system accounts. They're used only for certain things. Like here's our web server, right? And it's never logged in, which is a good thing. If you see someone logging in as www data, something's wrong. Okay. And then, we come down here and we have another user for a service account, and we have ptarent who's logged in now. And then, of course, root. So we see who last logged in based on username breakdown. Okay. And that's very good things to know, right? So we know ptarent logged in. We know that someone else has my account. I probably want to go ahead and change my password right now, right? And we know they started some rogue processes. So now we know that that Java process was started by ptarent, right? We know when it was started. We verified that they've been logging in and out as us. We know they've had a session for a long time during that time period. We know that they fired off this Python process that spawned all the other Java processes. Let's look and see what else we might be able to glean from the process itself, since it's still running. Okay, and one of the things that people do all the times is they freak out and they're like, "Oh God, I gotta close it down." No, unless it's actively sending out data or something, you don't need to worry about it at the moment. You've already been hacked, right? Haste makes waste. If you're going too fast to take notes, then you're going too fast. Take notes, write things down so that you can figure out and remember things, and you can put together a timeline. Okay, it's important to do those kind of things. So now what we'll do is we'll start to steal more information about this process. So most processes in Linux you're going to find under the proc directory. All right, and so these are all the different processes that are running by their process IDs. Okay, you can also find some interesting things such as the CPU info, right? So if you catted that out, you're going to see all of your CPU stuff. Now in this case, it's a Xeon, and we have, because it's processor of 3, it's actually 0 indexed, so there's actually 4 processors. Anyway, moving along. So again, if we look at this process directory, we find lots of stuff. We can even find that host process here that is that Python process. Okay, and again, to verify that, let's just make sure the AWX grep and then there. So now we know for a fact that this is that main.py again, right? So let's now look at the directory for there, and then you're going to see. Let's do -hal, okay? And yes, it's a lot of information. It's long, but our current working directory, okay, is here. So if we go here, we will find and this is a symbolic link. So we'll actually be able to see that main file. So we could really, from here, we could go ahead and say, show me those things, right? Current working directory, and now show me that directory. And since it's a symbolic link, the current working directory takes us directly to that link, and there's our main.py. So if we wanted to, we can now copy that file from here, right? And let's just say we're going to cat that main.py to evidence.py, right? And then we send that off to our malware team, or maybe ourselves, to analyze that and see what it is, and to verify, you can see it's there. So we can see in this case, it's Crafty is a program of some sort, and we can see, all the things. Now, I'm not going to go crazy into here because this is actually the program that I wrote, and this is, in this case, Crafty 4.0 Alpha 1. Anyway, so now we know some more information about this program, right? And now we're going to go back and cat. There's lots of stuff that you can find in here. Okay, so let's get rid of the current working directory. So in here we also see this wonderful command line here, right? So what's that? Let's cat that out and see what that might be. Whoops. So there's our command line. So you can see, Python 3 main.py, and the beginning of our prompt, that came out kind of crappy. So let's use strings to make it look a little better. Okay. So that's the command line that was ran, in case we didn't know, but we already knew that, right? But let's also look at some other things. Let's look at our environment variables. So these are all the environment variables for that process. And you can find lots of great information in here, especially if it was started from an SSH connection. Because if you look at this SSH connection, you get the IP address and the port number that they connected to. So they connected to my IP, or I'm sorry, this IP, right, on port 22, and it was this IP address. Now we already know that from the logs of last log where ptarrant logged in under that account. We also know that the terminal, and we know the user, we know the tmux pane, right? So we know tmux was involved, and we already knew that from up here, right? So there's our tmux that's running there, right? That means that if we're running tmux, we can probably hook into that, right? And then, of course, the present working directory for everything, the home directory for the user. There's a ton of information inside these environment variables. Okay, so that's all well and good. Now you can find this another way. All right, let's clear and I'll show you how you do that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find PS AUX E for the environment variables, and now when you do that, you will have all the environment variables. But see how it just trails off, right? It just breaks. So what we need to do is we need to put some W's here to basically say use all the columns you can, and you're going to find that it wraps. Okay, so let's clear real quick, and let's go back up here, and you can see, and I know it's a lot of text. Hold on a moment. So we can see here, like, this is the actual command that ran, but now we can see the terminal container, right? This is an LXC container. And here's our Python, right? And language here, path is here, notify sockets. So we can see all the environment variables here, but as you can see, it's just a lot of trash. It's hard to see, which is why I prefer to simply do a strings up there, and it will break it up for you nice and pretty. All right, so now we know more about our process, but maybe we want to go even deeper, right? I would take this and I would output this to a file and build up my evidence directory here. But let's also find out even more about this process, right? Let's do a list of open files, okay, which basically tells you everything that this process is touching, right? And in here we find lots of things. We're going to find, directories and regular files, current working directory again, right? So another way to find it. Memory hooks into what are essentially the Linux version of DLL files, right? Shared library files. These are normal, and this is all hooked into Python, of course. But then we see that this is using a different pip package, and this is a different pip package. So we can see cryptography and stuff. So without even looking at the code, we can get an idea of what this program is doing. In this case, we can see that we're using psutil. Well, I can Google that and find out what that does. I can go in here and I can look and say, Argon 2, what is that? What is cryptography? Why are we using cryptography, right? What's SciPython? Why are we using this SQLite file? What is this, right? And so this is actually, it's a direct line directly to that file, which is actually used as cache, essentially, for the SQLite file. And then we can see down here, we actually have SQLite files. We have all these log files. What are these doing? And what do these numbers mean? So don't worry about the 3. Okay, that's just the chain that it's in. U means read and write privileges. R means read privileges. W means write privileges. Okay, so it's not talking about it's a 2U server. It's just saying it's the second file handle, and in this case, they can read and write. And that makes sense because it is a TTY essentially. But we can also see other data streams, right? So we see here IP4 and IP6, and it's listening on those ports, right? So what's running on those ports? Maybe I should use Nmap to do a banner grab to find out what that's doing, right? Here are some other files. Maybe I want to grab this SQLite file and move it along. And why do we have all these pipes? And first in and file in and file out pipes. Why do we have these? And these, in this case, is how it's communicating to the Java process. So essentially, it's hooked into a process. So, ton of information can be gleaned from this one file, right? This one command of list of open files. Now, you can do things with here, like you can turn around and grep that for IPv star, and that'll show you all of the connections that the machine's doing, right? And maybe if we ran Nmap of some sort, maybe we can run it and then look at it again, and we can start seeing some connections. So by monitoring here, we can actually pipe this to a file and do like a tail essentially, and just run this every once in a while to kind of see what's going on. A better way to do that, though, would be to actually steal the data that is being sent back and forth. We'll do that in a few when we get a little further into this process. We're getting close to being completely done with this process as far as figuring out some stuff. But there's still one other piece. So we know with this process what files it's touching. We know what ports it's using. We know it's got all this stuff going on. We know it's hooked into other processes. We know who started it. We know how they started it, right? Maybe we need to, and we know that they logged in as us, right? So let's look at the auth log, right? And let's see who did what. So here we see a more what really happened, right? And you can not only see what happened, but you can see that they sudoed. And so you not only get the login, but here you actually see every time that they sudoed in, okay, or executed a command with some type of authentication mechanism. So that's a good thing to have. You definitely want to back that up and check it out. The other thing you might want to look at is let's see if we can't just like steal the memory out of this bad boy, right? Let's actually see how to dump the memory of this process. And so to do that, okay, we're going to use a program called gcore. Now gcore is really awesome. You simply say gcore and the process ID, fire it off. It's going to do some things. You will have to be root to do this, so you may have to sudo it. And now we've got a core file, which is going to take a moment to do. It's a big file, and I know it's a big file, so it may have locked up my term. There we go. Okay, so we have this giant file here. And I say giant because if you look, it's 700 meg. So that's literally the memory of this process. Okay, and you can do things like strings on this, right? And we'll just grab like the first, 200, 500 lines of code. Okay, so here you can actually see what's going on, like what instructions are being used in the program. And you can kind of get an idea of what it is capable of doing, right? So these are instructions that are being sent, and they're all stored in memory, and that's great and wonderful. And some of it's going to be gibberish. So let's clear this out, and instead of doing a head, I'm just going to fire it off and then cancel at a certain point so you can see why I would do that. So boom. Okay, so here we see you can actually look and find SQL statements inside here, right? You can see a lot of times you can see raw packets because this is a header for a request. You can see all kinds of stuff in here when you analyze your memory, and you can start looking for things. So you can find SQL statements, right, that were executed against that SQL. You can see HTML files that were being sent. You can see HTML requests that are being sent. None of this is going to be in order because it's however the memory used that particular spot. So we can see here we've got some more data that's being streamed in and out of it, right? You can do a lot by analyzing the memory. Now in this case it's 711 meg. It's a lot of memory, right? So let's clear this out one more time. I want to show one other thing real quick, and boom. Okay, so here we can see, again, moving along, now we can see more logs from that Java process. So we see that this process is actually watching this process, and we can see all the logs that are still in memory. So even if someone deletes the log files, you can snag this memory and you can get data out of that memory and see things that the program saw, even if someone tried to hide their tracks. This is why I tell people, who come in, they're like, oh Lord, there's a rogue process, we got to cancel it. No, let it fire off. Let it continue doing what it's doing. Keep that puppy alive. If anything, what you want to do is maybe firewall off the box. Disable all network connections to the outside world or to a machine that might be compromised, right? If it's a VM, you can save the state and move that. Maybe you can migrate it to another machine. There's all kinds of things you can do to keep that going, keep that process running, because you can grab its memory and get a ton of information out of that without having to tear down the process, because there's really no way to get it back, right? So that's been a good look into memory, right? And we also, now we know who the process was, and we're kind of going through my checklist of like, okay, we know what spawned the process, we know there was a user who logged in, we know they did it through tmux, we know what process it is, we have the file that it's actually being used, we have all the environment variables, which could be important depending upon what they're doing, we have a dump of the memory, we have all kinds of information about this process. So now, let's see, because we know for a fact this process is, we know this process is still communicating on IP6 and IP4. And we'll pretend that we see back and forth transmissions, right? So we're going to see what's being said, right? What data is being sent? There's a couple different ways to glean that information, but probably the best way is just to do tcpdump, okay? And with that, actually, I will make that its own little segment. So let's clear this out real quick, and now we'll discuss tcpdump. So now we're going to talk about how to capture that network data, right? Because we know it's on port 8000 and we know it's on port 8004, so, or 8443, yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a program called tcpdump, okay? Interface is going to be any, even though we could set it to an interface, we're just going to say any to make things easy, okay? We're going to say verbose output, maybe even very verbose, right? And maybe we want to see everything, right? So we're going to ask to see a hex parsing imprinting. Let's set the packet size to 1500, not 15,000, 1500, which is basically the max. And let's say we want this on port 8000, right? And we're going to write a file called test.pcap. Okay, so this is going to run in the background and basically watch that port. And so every time someone hits that page or makes connection or does anything on that port, we're going to save it as a PCAP. All right. And then at some point, after a day or so, maybe an hour or whatever, we'll cancel this out. Now again, earlier I said you got to take this thing off the net to do a lot of the, the forensic side, and that's true. And you're like, well, if you take it off the net, then how can you do TCP dump? Well, that comes into the question of, if you look at the memory and you see that it's not really doing anything terrible, but maybe you want to see exactly what that TCP information looks like, you can do it there, right? You can go ahead and throw it back online and do it. Or maybe you set up a netcat listener on that port and you see what they're sending in, right? Or maybe you just decide, you know what, I've already been owned for the last hour. What's the extra 2 or 3 minutes? Let me go ahead and just do a TCP dump to see what kind of data they're taking, right? And then once you got that, now you can, in Wireshark, go open that up. Now, I don't have Wireshark in terminal, but you can do strings real quick, and you can kind of look and see, okay, cool, so we see the actual headers that are being sent in the HTML itself. We see that we've got some errors of a 404 not found, right? So we see the data that is being sent back and forth, and we can open that up in Wireshark if we wanted to really get into it. I'll do a whole video on Wireshark in a few. But you notice that we did a whole bunch of arguments here. Now, you don't have to do that, right? You could just make it very easy and just say, every interface, everything that goes on, show me the things, right? And this will show all traffic that is being sent to and from that machine. And then you can cancel that out. And then you can look at your TCP dump. And, you can, from there, do filtering from inside Wireshark, because Wireshark can do this filtering as well. And you can put in what network and stuff like that you want to look at. And again, this is the same data pretty much. But this is all traffic. And then with Wireshark, you can go in even further and see more and more data. So this has been a very long video. It's, 27 minutes. It was longer than that in real life because I paused a few times to validate some things and make sure that, things were set up correctly. So that is a good way for you to tear down into a process, kind of see what's going on, steal the memory of it, turning around, so far we've found out everything about the process, right? We've found out who started it. We found out what TTY. We found out they were using tmux. We know that they used an account that was on the machine already, so we're going to go ahead and change that password. We can see all logins that were done from that user, so we have a timeline of things to go check for, right? We also have all of our environment variables that we've already got out as well, so we kind of know what's going on with that. We know the whole process tree from when we use PS tree. We know the whole process there. We can turn around and also look for other processes that this user did, so we could clear out and we can say PS AUX and grep just the user, right? Now we can see everything that's currently running under the ptarent thing, and we see we have several bashes. We can see also this tmux here, so maybe we want to look into that and reattach to it. But these are all the things that the machine has under ptarent's context, right? We also have a dump of the memory, which is huge. We can get that off to someone to do forensics on it, maybe a teammate, maybe yourself because you're doing everything your own. Hopefully it's not that, because 711 megs is a lot of data. But it is what it is. Chunk it up, split it up. There is a program in Linux to split files, so maybe you want to split that up into different pieces and parts and hand that off to different people and then go around and put them together. And again, it doesn't really matter if you do that, because memory, it being so transient and ephemeral and how it does its stuff, you'll get pieces and parts of data, but they won't be all together. It's very rare you ever find like the entire file printed in memory. It happens. I mean, you saw the log file that I pulled, but you can glean a lot of information from there. especially like if someone went through and deleted the log files and the process is still running. Grab that thing, grab the memory. And in this case, we also grabbed a PCAP, so we now know exactly what kind of network communication that machine was doing. So we're at 30 minutes. It's been a huge deep dive. I have a meeting to go to for work, so I burned up my lunch hour to do this, but totally worth it. It's fun to tear this down. We'll do the same thing with Windows later. We'll do a whole lot more forensics work in general. All right, so thank you for your time. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. Share it out to your friends, and have a good day.